And we're back, and this time we're going to talk about exporting to that UWP format we've been hearing about the whole time.
Yeah, we've talked about it a ton so far. But
And what does that stand for?
Universal Windows Platform.
Exactly.
So if you don't have that memorized by now, you must have not watched because we talked about it so much. But now we're going to take that next step to export from Construct 2, get it in Visual Studio, and get prepared to do a couple of things, including, in the end, end up publishing to the store.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let's see what we have in store. So on my screen, you see here we have a quick list of things we're going to talk about. First of all, before we can get started, we'll have to enable developer mode. It's a very easy step. It may be hard to find depending on how you have your machine set up. And this is a one-time thing. When you set up developer mode, you can develop stuff on your computer with Construct 2, with Unity, maybe with XAML, anything else. But this enables your current computer for developer mode.
Yes, that allows you to take the project that you're working on and run it on your local machine.
Yep.
To kind of simulate it being an app that's already created.
Right. So you might be wondering, well, I've been running my game the whole time in the browser. Well, why can't I just run it within Visual Studio? Well, because Visual Studio runs it in its own environment. When you run it from Construct 2, it's actually running it in the web browser.
Right.
But when you run it in Visual Studio, it's going to run it as a Windows 10 game. And this is what we're doing. We're enabling developer mode to run Windows 10 apps on your machine.
Perfect.
And next, we're going to talk about how you can enter some additional game details for your project, because you could create a game and just call it my game or my project, but you probably want something a little more descriptive, right?
Probably so, yeah.
And some credits in there, maybe your version number, a couple of other things you want to add in there. But this becomes really important when you're about to publish your game, because what happens when you put the game out in the store?
You want people to find it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It has to be unique. It has to be something that people can not only find, but also maybe get more information from in the description.
Yeah.
So we'll learn how to do that. And if you have watched one of our older MVA videos, you may have learned how to do this on Windows 8.1 in the old Windows Store. This is sort of a revision of that. So it may be familiar to you if you've done it before. But if you haven't done it for Windows 10 already, this may be new to you.
Yeah, it's worth, so much changes in a year. It's worth kind of touching up on these points and making sure that people know exactly how to do the things that they used to do with a new process. Make sure they're up to date. So.
And finally, because this section is for exporting to the new Windows 10 Universal format, we're going to export to the Windows 10 Universal format. So everything we'll do from the beginning up till then leads up to it. And we'll be running your game from Visual Studio as a Windows 10 app. We can run it in a simulator. We'll run it on a device. We have a phone with us today. So we'll be doing a couple of fun things here today.
Perfect.
All right. Well, let's get started then. So the first feature here you see on my screen, if you search for use developer features or just developer mode, you can sort of dig into your system settings. The right side of the screenshot here shows how update and security under your settings will have a section called for developers. There's 3 modes here. One is don't use developer features. If you don't want to develop anything at all, I would not recommend that if you want to develop. Right? The second one is sideload apps. Let's say if you're developing apps for a business and you don't want to run it in a store, you could be deploying it internally within a team. You could be sideloading those apps in your system. A lot of different operating systems support this. And finally, there's developer mode, which is the setting you want when you're developing something. So let's go back to Windows and see how we can find this setting. So if I go to my system icon, I already have this open here. So you may be wondering, well, how do I get to settings? A quick refresh on that. We click on the little notification icon on the bottom right. There is an all settings icon on the lower right as well. So simply by clicking on that and going to all settings, that's one of many ways that you can open up settings. You could also click on the Windows button here and type settings, and that takes you to the settings app. You can also dig into specific developer features. So since I showed you that specific search in the Windows menu within one of the screenshots, we'll just dig into it directly using the settings app. So the section here is update and security. Let's click on that. And you'll see here on the lower left, there's for developers. So let's go into for developers. And there you go. We have those 3 different settings. Right now, this machine has already been set to developer mode. So that's what we'll continue to use. If you're doing this for the first time on a particular machine, make sure you take care of the step 1s before you continue.
Yeah, and this is a little bit easier than it used to be. With Windows Phone 8.1, there was like a program you would run. I forget the Windows Phone developer mode programmer. I forget exactly what it was called, but it would basically developer unlock your phone.
Right.
But now this is just a checkbox.
Right. So this is for your machine. So when you deploy on your phone, you will get a prompt to do it on your phone as well, but it's a lot easier now.
Right. Yeah.
So now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and check out our actual game details. So I have a couple of projects open here in Construct 2, including the Space Shooter game. So Space Shooter on my projects panel is named Spacey Space Shooter. So if I click on the project, on the left here, I have the project properties. Now, the name says Spacey Space Shooter, version number has 4 numbers on it. Now, you don't need that many numbers, but one thing I've noticed is after you do the export, Visual Studio kind of complains if you don't have the full format of 1.x.x.x. So I've chosen to do all of them. And depending on the way Sierra does the export, you may not get what Windows is expecting. So I'll show you how to kind of work around those quirks. But once you export it, you should be able to make a couple of minor changes to get everything working. So we'll see how that works out. We also have a description on there, which could be longer than the name, but in this case, I've just named it the same as the name. Obviously, for a description, you want something a little more than this.
And for your final description, this is not necessarily the description that goes directly in the store. You will, in the store submission process, have a descriptions tab there as well, that you can be a little more specific and get into the details.
Exactly. So you can start with something small over here, and then let's continue down. So again, back on the screen, after name, version, and description, we have an ID, and this is something that's pretty unique for your game. And I've just chosen to use my last name, my first name, and an acronym for the game itself. This could be maybe your studio name your game name or something that's unique to you. Or
it's kind of like a URL in reverse.
A backwards URL, yes. So a lot of package names are created this way and have decided to use the same format. And the author, it could be your name and someone else's name. In this case, I've just chosen to use my name. I have my email and my website there. So what happens when you hit export? So a couple of screenshots we have here. Let's go back to game details, just to recap. We clicked on the projects tab, click on the project name, and we updated name, version, description, and so on. So to export it, there is a giant export button on the toolbar of Construct 2. So I've highlighted that there. And the export dialog usually changes over time. Sierra always adds something new or takes things away. This Windows Store icon has been there for a while, ever since 8.1 went to version 10. All the different exports for Windows are under Windows Store. So we're going to see how that works. So someone might be wondering, well, if it's a giant export button, there's no way I can miss it, right? It's like literally, it's right there. So I'm going to zoom in here. You see it's right there. But yes, you can miss it because sometimes some people might have their menu just closed out like that. Well, how do you open it again? So in the top right, I have a tiny little double arrow here. And let's say I click on the double arrow. You could have accidentally clicked it. Maybe your toolbar went away. So again, a lot of advanced users I've noticed sometimes don't realize they've done it. You may have been using Construct 2 for a while, and you wonder, hey, where did my menu go? So you can click that just to toggle whether to display that toolbar or not. So again, it shows you the giant export button. Even if you have it turned off and if you prefer to work like this, you can click on File, and one of the options down here is Export Project. So again, there's always a way to get to it.
So you can find it in a couple of different places.
Exactly.
Like you can toggle this bar in and out if you want like more space to actually see and develop with.
Right. So you may not have a giant screen like we do here in the video.
We've got pretty big ones here.
It's really useful to be able to do that. So what happens if you click Export Project? Again, if you saw in the screenshot, it has many different options in the dialog. Now, this may not be something that you will see exactly as is. As I've mentioned, Sierra does change this over time. So you click on Windows Store and click Next. And the first thing it lets you do is instead of letting you choose the option for which platform you want, it lets you choose a location. Now, be very careful when you choose a location because it seems to always default to something. It doesn't seem to keep the last selection when you've changed it. And it also goes to a location that is not the location where your project is saved. So by default, you may think, wait a second, will only go into a subfolder in where my game is saved? No, it's actually going to the desktop on the computer I'm currently using.
Yeah, by default, it comes to my desktop on a different machine.
But my project is actually not saved on the desktop. So you might want to browse there and maybe change it to something else. In this case, I'll just let it fall to the desktop because I've done this export before. I do have a separate project I've exported. So another option down here, it says PNG compression, non-standard or brute. If you really want to compress all these PNGs, you could do the brute force or the brute method, but it is very slow. You don't need that. The standard is recommended, and it's useful to have some recompression there. The final thing down here is the minification. It does use Java apparently to do the installation. I've noticed in the past sometimes this would just fail if you did have the right version of Java installed. But in newer versions, I haven't noticed any issues, and I just leave that checked on. You might be wondering, well, what does minification do? It just uglifies your script, and that's actually a real term that I've seen in the web world. If you uglify or minify your JavaScript files, it just makes it
takes away all the white space. Basically.
Yeah, so basically it condenses everything. It takes away a lot of the white space. Make sure that someone else might want to read your code. They won't be able to see it.
Right.
Yep.
And it would be difficult at least.
Well, Construct 2 does a pretty good job of clearing up your JavaScript anyway, because you're not writing any real code while you're in Construct 2. So if the JavaScript that is bundled in there is unreadable anyway, the minification just makes it a little more protected.
Yeah.
Nothing is completely protected, so when you make a game, just make your game good, make your game stand out, so you don't have to worry about people trying to steal your name, because you'd probably have made a good name for yourself if your game takes off. All right, so let's see what happens when you click export. Now it's going to ask me, right after I've clicked the export button, hey, what target version do you want? You'll notice a couple of the older versions there, Windows 8, 8.1, Windows Phone 8, and 8.1 Universal. So back in the day, you would have multiple versions for Universal, whether it was 8.1 or Phone 8.1. And for Windows 10, there's only one version that opens up in Visual Studio 2015.
Because it's one project, one package, one store, one process, the whole time.
Yep. And in case you're wondering, well, I don't know much about this publishing Windows Store app. Where do I go? There's a link right there. It says Help on Publishing Windows Store Apps. So you can click on the link if you need more info.
But you should still stick around to the end and watch as we do that for you.
Right. So if you're watching this video right now, obviously you won't be able to click that particular link on the video screen. So what I'll do is I will click the export button next on my screen. So once I click export, that takes a few seconds. Doesn't take too long. It says exporting project. And the best part about this is after it's done, it will give me two options. I can either go to the project directly, or I can go to the folder directly where the project got exported. So instead of going back to Construct 2 to my project, I'm going to go to Open Destination folder. And now I have the location where everything got dumped out. You'll notice I have an images folder, which is actually pretty important because that's where all our placeholder images go. And then down here, I have a Space Shooter solution. So basically, if I have a solution file, I know that that's something I can open in Visual Studio.
Yep.
So let's double click on that and see what that looks like. So Construct 2 did a pretty good job of creating this file, but sometimes some things might be missing. So let's see what it did. I'm going to click on this build button on the top. I'm going to go to the very top here. There's two compilation buttons, build and build solution. Helps me build my project and compiles the code. And you can also click F6 on your keyboard. But how did that appear on the toolbar? I just right-clicked on my toolbar, and there is an option here for build. If it's checked, then you can actually enable it, and you can see it and you can click on it. But in case it's not checked, the build button may not be available. In order to get to it, you would simply go to the build button on the top menu itself. So again, it says build, build solution, and that keyboard shortcut F6 is right there as well. So let's go ahead and click the build button, and that's going to go ahead. And at the very bottom left, you'll notice it says build succeeded on the very lower left, and on the output bar, it says 1 succeeded. So I've been able to build my project successfully. So if I click on this little green play button, I would be able to run it on one of these many devices. So either it's a physical device, or maybe it's the device I'm currently on, which is my machine. And there's also a bunch of emulators or simulators here. So let's go to a local machine to run it locally. So if I change to local machine, the text on the green button now changes to the words local machine. So I'm going to try and click on that and see what happens. In the bottom left here, you'll notice it says deploy. Oh, it went away as it went very quickly.
It's too fast, yeah.
Very fast. And then now I have this running as the Windows 10 game. You'll notice that there's no browser toolbar because it uses the browser engine, but it has a maximize, minimize, and an X button on the top, on the top right, just as you would in a real game. It also says press enter on keyboard, just as you would see on a real device. So I'm going to press enter on my keyboard, and then I can play left and right. I'm going to play this myself. And as you've seen from my previous experience with James, I'm not very good at this, so I don't get a lot of points.
But it's working just as you would expect, right?
Exactly.
So basically, how it did in the browser, and it's running as a Windows 10. Yeah. And you didn't have to do anything.
I didn't have to do anything different. So you may be wondering, well, why didn't the joystick get detected at the beginning? You may have noticed that. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it again, and you'll notice that it says gamepad : and there's nothing after that. Because initially it did say detected when I loaded in Construct 2. Well, that's because I actually disconnected my joystick earlier so I could connect the phone to be able to publish to it. So let's go ahead and deploy it to the phone first, and we'll see how that works. So you may be wondering, well, how do I publish it to the phone? Well, you may have noticed under the drop-down on the top here near the green button, it says device. And I've set up my device currently so my phone can run this. So I'm going to go ahead and take my phone in my hand and unlock it. And while I have this phone in my hand, I'm going to go ahead and go back to my screen. I'm going to click on the green button, or the little triangle next to the green button, and choose device. So if I click on the green button now, it should actually deploy directly to the device. The deployment starts, and this one might take a little longer, so I can actually see the words deploy started. I'm going to zoom out of it so it can continue. So what happens here is it's going to compile the code for the device that I've selected, and it starts running a couple of commands. It registers the application, and then it physically launches my device. Now, you may be wondering, well, how am I supposed to see the device on your video? Well, if I pick it up in my hand here, you can see the tiny little screen on my hand here. But what I'll do is I'll actually use a very cool app to actually project my screen. So if you go back to my screen here, there's a tiny little app down here that says Project My Screen app. And that's available for free. I'm going to go ahead and run it, and you can see the actual game. So what happens when I do this, on my screen I actually get a little pop-up that says Allow Screen Projection. I'll say yes, because I've already approved it before. And now you can see that the game is actually running on the machine. But the first thing you'll notice is I haven't included any touch controls in this game. So it says press Enter on keyboard or A on gamepad. Well, my phone doesn't have a keyboard or a gamepad, so this game doesn't work at all. So this is to show you what would happen if you try to deploy something to your phone without supporting any of the controls.
Yeah, that goes back to being able to use all those different inputs. If we had done it, the way we should, where we support touch and mouse and keyboard and gamepads, for instance,
right?
That would work flawlessly across the different devices. So it's something you always have to keep in mind, is that these users could be running this on a bunch of different kind of devices with different hardware.
Yep. So it's a good thing to see that if you don't support that specific device, then you can still deploy it to it, but you'd have to put in some extra work to add some controls. So let's go ahead and deploy a game which does have the controls. So again, back on my screen, I'm going to go ahead and stop this. And what I'll do is we'll go ahead and run a different game. Let's go to the gamepad controls. So let's say I have SC button layout for another game, and I'm going to go ahead and do export to Windows Store, and going through the exact same set of steps. And while that's happening, I actually do have a version installed on my game, on my phone. So I'm going to go ahead and project my screen app again, and you'll be able to see it when I click yes on my device. And I'll turn my phone over, and I'll click on a specific game, and you should see it come up in a second. So basically now you're seeing the button controls version. You see a little character, and I'm going to touch the right button on the screen, and the character is going to run to the right. And then when we touch the left button, character is going to run on the left. Now, I've just taken a game that I developed completely on my computer, deployed it to my phone with no changes whatsoever.
And we got to run it on the local machine as a desktop.
Yep.
Windows 10 application as well. So.
Exactly. So I'm going to go ahead and Alt F4 out of that. So when I click Alt F4, what it does, it closes the current application, which is a common shortcut in Windows. And at the same time, you'll notice that the export that I just ran, it took a few seconds, and it also completed running. So let's see what the newest export did. When I open it, again, it opens up a solution. It creates a solution file along with the rest of the files.
And that would be the same process as what we just saw. You open it up, and you can run it basically without having to make any changes.
Yep.
Awesome.
So let's see what else we have here. So we ran the game within Construct 2. We ran it as a Windows 10 game.
Yep.
We ran it within Visual Studio as a Windows 10 app, and we also ran it on a phone. But there were some other options there too. If you open up, let's say one of these drop-down options, you'll notice that simulator. So for simulator, you can actually click on the device and change the simulator. It's actually going to launch a Windows 10 simulator inside your machine. So let's see what that does. So now it's just starting the simulator, and that could take a few seconds. And you'll see that it actually creates a machine inside my machine. And that is really weird because I'm actually seeing a desktop that mirrors the desktop that I currently have. So this is really weird. It's a little, it goes inside the other window. So now I can actually hit enter, and I'm playing the game inside this machine that's inside this other machine. Sort of like having a virtual machine. But it does work as well, and you can test things like orientation. And I'll flip it around the other way.
And you can do the same kind of thing with phone emulators as well. So if you didn't have a Windows phone, you could test with the emulators. You always want to test on a real device, but if you don't have it, you can test on the emulator as well.
Right. So again, what I've done here is I've clicked the little button here that says rotate clockwise. So this particular game, it just works in this orientation. So if it's something that supported vertical and horizontal orientation, you would see that as well. So let's go ahead and close that. So it minimizes that. You'll see it's still running in the background. So what I'll do is on the lower right, you see where the simulator is running. I can either click stop from the top, but since the simulator runs as a separate option, what I usually do is I'll just go and right click on it and close it from here. And that goes ahead and kills the simulator. So now we've seen a couple of different ways that you can export your game and run it. When we reach the publishing part of the tutorial, we'll talk about how you can add additional things like changing your menu options or some basic images that are available inside your games, because Construct 2 creates placeholder images for you. But again, during the publishing process, you'll have to change
your own, use your own assets.
All right. So the last thing we'd like to cover here is I'm going to connect my controller back here. So I will disconnect my phone and connect the controller.
And just run that as a Windows 10 application again?
Exactly. So I'm going to run it on my local machine. So back on the machine, I've changed the drop-down back to local machine. I'm going to click the green play button. And this time when it comes up, it says press enter on keyboard or A on gamepad to continue. But again, because I do have a gamepad connected, it should be detecting gamepad within a few seconds. I'm going to press A to see what happens, and that is already detected. So now I can press the keyboard controls. And let's see if the other one works too. So the wireless one has been off for a while. So I'm going to turn on the wireless controller and pass it on to James over here. And we'll see if the other one can be controlled.
Yeah, there
and
it is.
Has. And luckily, I got a head start, so I do have 2 points here. And I guess I'm winning this time. Yeah.
I'll let you win that one.
Exactly. So again, that's how you can get ahead in your game. Just jump into it first, right?
Yeah.
That's how I do it anyway.
Cool. So all those features that we just saw in the web, testing in the web is working great, right?
Yep.
With Windows 10 applications.
Right. So again, to recap, we covered different ways to export your game. Actually, one way to export your game and a different way to play the game that has been exported. So back to our slides. We just took a look at how you can export. We talked about the minification options and so on. And finally, we saw a quick demo of exporting UWP for Windows 10.
Awesome. And then next up, I'm going to take a look at kind of the update for ads, and we'll jump into that here in a second.
Yep. Well, we hope you enjoyed that.